Putin's plane has crashed in Crimea in an emergency. Nearly 30 soldiers have died. The elite of the Russian army has never been mourned like this before. Combat wings can't take it anymore. Another Su-34 fighter jet has taken its final flight. Meanwhile, the nervous dictator has delivered a new ultimatum to Zelensky. Moscow has finally fought itself into a corner. The fate of Donbas has been decided. Peskov is once again caught between two fires. The Easter truce is Russia's chance to save itself from disaster. Shock. Fedorov has secured a victory for Kyiv. Ukraine, together with the EU, is launching a true defense revolution. Now our strength is invincible. The development of our drones, now in the sights of the Americans. The USA is begging to launch joint production. And all of this happened right now. Hello, I'm Darina Hutsakalo, and we're getting started. A sensation, Putin is in double mourning. In just one day, 2 aircraft were taken out at once. The main Z-War correspondents donned mourning, first because of the loss of the Su-34. They say the plane crashed while repelling a drone attack. The pilot likely died, the navigator survived. Meanwhile, Ukrainian media are striking. More precisely, it could have been the loss of a fighter bomber right in the middle of a combat mission.
Unfortunately, trouble never comes alone.
Now, the bunker lackeys have started shedding tears over the crash of a military transport plane, an An-26, in Crimea. It is known that 29 of Putin's soldiers died at once.
The An-26 was transporting personnel. Preliminarily, 30 people.
Contact with the plane was lost during a routine flight over the peninsula. Later, it was established that the aircraft crashed into a cliff. The Russian Ministry of Defense insists that neither missiles nor drones were involved in the crash.
There was no strike on the plane. The preliminary cause of the crash is technical malfunction, the agency stated.
An urgent new peace ultimatum. Putin has put forward yet another fresh proposal. Ukraine must leave Donbas within 2 months. In exchange, the occupiers promised to end the war. Volodymyr Zelensky spoke about this.
The issue is that now there are new deadlines. They say that in 2 months they will capture eastern Ukraine, they will capture Donbas. And that's why there are 2 months to withdraw. And the war will end. And if Ukraine does not withdraw, then Russia will capture Donbas, and then there will be other conditions.
The president noted that the Russians perfectly understand that they will not be able to capture Donbas in 2 months. That is why they resort to pressuring our partners. At the same time, the head of state emphasized that Ukraine is ready for compromise. A ceasefire, where we are standing now. This is not enough for the enemy. The Kremlin is once again exerting pressure through the United States. Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov, stated that Washington should influence Kyiv to fulfill certain agreements following the Trump-Putin meeting in Anchorage. No one is saying exactly what those agreements are, but in Moscow they stubbornly keep talking about some kind of Anchorage spirit and dropping hints, as if to say Ukraine is interfering with their behind-the-scenes plans. Nevertheless, the Kremlin itself, as usual, starts backpedaling when it comes time to make real decisions. The day before, Volodymyr Zelensky announced that Ukrainians are ready for a ceasefire, especially for Easter. In response, Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, stated that Moscow did not see a clearly formulated initiative.
As always, he spoke about their readiness and willingness to agree to a truce, any kind, even an Easter one. This is what President Zelensky was talking about.
Putin's jester also claims that the Russian occupiers are supposedly advancing on the front, so Ukraine needs any kind of truce, but, I quote, must make the appropriate decisions so that we achieve peace, not just a ceasefire. In turn, Zelensky stated that Ukrainians, together with Americans, will discuss how close the participants in the process are to trilateral agreements, or at least to holding such a meeting. Extremely important. Mykhailo Fedorov announced joint defense projects with the EU. New technologies, joint developments, and striking power that can change the rules of the game. Ukraine is boosting its defense to the maximum, and this is just the beginning.
The focus of the work is expanding funding and launching joint projects in drones, air defense, and long-range capabilities. Priority: flexible financing. Ukraine must quickly allocate resources to critical directions according to the war plan. Production of drones, counter-drone systems, and the development of deep strike capabilities.
Moreover, together with the EU, Ukraine is launching mega projects within the EDP framework, drones, air defense, and strike systems. And all of this is already on its way to the battlefield. We are testing new technologies, massively scaling up what really works, drones, anti-drone systems, everything that holds back the enemy. Another 260 million euros from the EU are going towards upgrading Ukraine's defense industry and integrating it into the European defense ecosystem. The number one highlight is anti-ballistic systems, including missiles for intercepting ballistic threats. Ukraine is seriously raising the stakes and changing the rules of the game on the front line. The Americans are urgently and openly impressed by Ukrainian technologies. General Chereshny's development impressed the United States so much that one of the leading American corporations is moving to create a joint venture with a Ukrainian UAV manufacturer. What was just yesterday a response to the war is today becoming a standard recognized even in the United States.
The partnership involves setting up the production of FPV drones and interceptors directly in the United States, the Ukrainian company told the military.
The joint venture will be organized primarily for the American market and to fulfill Pentagon orders. At the same time, the partners do not plan to limit themselves to these areas only, considering supplies to other countries as well.
To work with a company that stood strong in the face of the impossible and rose to fight when Ukraine's sovereignty was under threat, that is exactly the spirit Wilcox would like to be a part of.
Approval at the highest level lies ahead. Before launching the joint venture, the partners must secure the support of the head of state and relevant institutions. A powerful explosive strike on Russian territory. The Russians are panicking. A nuclear mushroom cloud in the sky. Praise for the air defense, but once again it malfunctions and hits the wrong target. Safe zones are becoming fewer and fewer. And inside Russia itself, a wave of criticism is growing. The patriots are openly accusing the Ministry of Defense of failures. Leningrad region. Now it's no longer Russia. Unexpectedly, Zelensky grabbed hold of the enemy with both hands. A knockout is about to happen. Details worth hearing. Don't miss them.
The Russian territory is once again facing a state of significant turmoil. It seems to be some kind of
A strange sound. Something large flying. Well, what's flying there? Wow, I set up the camera just in time, damn. Why is there such an explosion there, like it's going to be nuclear or something? What do you mean, nuclear?
At the Ministry of Aggression of the Russian Federation, as usual, they reported back with bravado. Overnight, they claimed to have shot down more than 100 Ukrainian drones in 9 Russian regions, as well as over the waters of the Sea of Azov and over temporarily occupied Crimea. How many were actually shot down is unknown, but the fact that some got through is certain. That's a fact. Krasnodar in particular came under attack. There, one of the drones crashed into a multi-story residential building. Local authorities reported 3 people injured. The Rostov region was also awake all night. The head of the region reported an attack. They were hit by more than 60 drones. Taganrog also came under attack. There, as a result of falling debris, residential buildings caught fire. And once again, Russian air defense is being blamed for everything. Russian air defense was operating directly over residential buildings. Local residents filmed their supposed repelling of the attack. But in the Samara region, the air defense either didn't work or, as always, proved ineffective. As a result, residential buildings in Tolyatti were not damaged. The same can't be said about the Kuibyshev Azot chemical plant, which was already attacked on March 11th. The enterprise is among the top 10 largest in Russia's nitrogen industry, and once again, it was hit.
Behind the house there,
There was nothing left. The daily strikes on Russian cities are forcing officials to make excuses to the Russian people. On federal channels, Kremlin allies keep insisting that Russian air defense is the best in the world. But now, a new narrative has emerged. It turns out these strikes are not scary and are even good for Russians.
Accordingly, I declare we have the best air defense in the world, and our air defense is the best. No one. No one has it today. And the fact that sometimes a drone manages to reach quite deep somewhere, in a way, that's even good, because we gain experience in repelling mass raids.
But even the so-called military bloggers have stopped believing the Russian officials. And after seeing how, for several days now, drones have been setting fire to the Ust-Luga port, they shared a frightening suspicion.
In light of all these events, there are only two assumptions. If suddenly, when enemy nuclear missiles are launched at us, the air defense will also leave the chat. A retaliatory strike by the regiment might not happen, since it could very well turn out that the actual state of the missile forces, but of strategic purpose, corresponds to all other structures of the Russian Ministry of Defense, meaning they are limited exclusively to pretty reports. But we won't have time to find out about it anymore.
By the way, about Ust-Luga, this oil port continues to take hits from Ukrainian drones. Although it's been consistently hot there for almost a week now, and the president of Ukraine does not hide the fact that these strikes on Ust-Luga are a response to attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, and official Kyiv is even ready to stop these responses. For this, Moscow simply needs to stop its attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure.
We're not just striking, I want to remind everyone, we are responding. Now you might wonder why I am bringing this up to you at this moment. In recent times, following such a significant global energy crisis, we have indeed received very clear and specific signals from some of our international partners regarding how we might scale back or mitigate our strategic responses against the oil and energy sectors of the Russian Federation. I want to emphasize once again that if Russia is ready, if they don't strike Ukrainian energy facilities, we won't respond against their energy sector.
But as long as the Kremlin doesn't dare to act, Russian territory will continue to see action and lose a lot of money. However, Ukrainian drones and missiles are unlikely to be upset if they have to keep working. This looks like a turning point. Europe is sharply changing its tone and taking a step that openly plays on Ukraine's side. Kaja Kallas is entering into a tough political confrontation with Marco Rubio. This time, without diplomatic pauses, the signal is clear. There will be no more backroom deals with Moscow. Zelensky no longer agrees to anything less than security guarantees for Kyiv. Now, after this, Donbas is finally excluded from any exchange scenarios. Ukraine is seizing the initiative. The resolution may be much closer than it seems. Let's watch.
The US and Europe have entered into a real confrontation over the war in Ukraine. At the G7 meeting, the head of European diplomacy, Kallas, and US Secretary of State Rubio exchanged sharp statements. Kallas criticized the US for the fact that a year has passed and nothing has changed. When will their patience regarding Russia run out?
This is a typical Russian tactic, to conduct negotiations and demand what never belonged to them, and this is a trap that should not be fallen into. If we, together with the Americans, put pressure on Russia, we can put an end to the war in Ukraine and establish a strong and lasting peace. We see that Russia is helping Iran with intelligence to carry out strikes and kill Americans, as well as assisting with drones for attacks on neighboring countries and American military bases. If the Americans want to stop the war, they need to put pressure on the Russians so that they cannot help Iran.
Rubio responded that they have already done a lot, and if the Europeans know better, they can try it themselves. He essentially began to threaten to withdraw from the peace process.
I'm not here to please them. On a personal level, I get along well with them, but I'm more concerned about the well-being of the people of the United States, whom I work for. I don't work for France, Germany, Japan, or others, even though they are all wonderful people. We constantly receive requests for assistance in the war in Ukraine, and we have more resources than any other country in the world. But when the United States was in need, they didn't receive any help. Some European leaders said that the war in Iran was not their war. The war in Ukraine is not our war either. But we still made a significant contribution. Well,
it's clear what Rubio is doing when he knows perfectly well what Trump's position is and knows that Trump doesn't want to put any pressure on Putin at all. But at the first opportunity, he rushes to call and ask for help. Rubio has to make excuses. It's unpleasant for him, but he might think that the White House is holding its ground. This has basically been his position over the past year.
In Russia, they immediately started to agree and declared that the US is not putting enough pressure on Ukraine and that it is the Ukrainians who are to blame for the war still continuing.
It also seems that the Americans believe they can really put pressure on and influence Kyiv. They got involved in the regulation process. Moreover, they voiced a number of quite interesting, I would say, useful remarks and proposals, but so far they have not been implemented.
There was also a conflict between Rubio and the Ukrainian president. Zelensky stated that the Americans are demanding that Ukraine withdraw from Donbas as a security guarantee.
If today Russia is speaking in quite an ultimatum-like manner, saying it will end the war, only after the withdrawal of Ukrainian armed forces from the entire territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. And if this ultimatum is being voiced, furthermore, representatives from the American side have stated that after this, once Russia finally ends the war, we will transfer the responsibility of the sanctions over to you. We will give you the sanctions in another case, though. However, we simply will not be providing them to you at this time. While it is true that various people may hold differing opinions about this matter, every single signal and indicator observed throughout the entire negotiation process clearly indicate, and this is not just my personal analysis, it is explicitly and quite directly articulated that we will be able to receive comprehensive and robust security guarantees from the United States of America. However, this will not happen before the ceasefire, nor will it occur before the final end of the war. It will happen only after our troops have fully withdrawn from the Donbas region.
The US Secretary of State was outraged that the president of Ukraine was allegedly not telling the truth, and no one is putting pressure on anyone.
That's a lie. And I saw him say it. And it's a real shame that he said that, because he knows it's not true. He was not told that. He was told the obvious. Security guarantees will not come into effect until the war is over, because otherwise you are getting involved in the war. He was told very clearly he should have understood that security guarantees only come into effect after the war ends. But this was not related to him having to enter the territory. I don't know why he's saying this. It's simply not true.
Ruby interprets it this way. As you know, we're not putting pressure on them because we're not directly telling them to withdraw their troops from Donetsk region. We're simply maintaining their Russian position for them. And Zelensky might consider that when... At this exact same point in time, while these various developments were taking place and unfolding concurrently in a completely parallel and synchronized manner, everything was happening all at once.
It should be noted that Europe is finally becoming an independent actor and is increasingly voicing objections to the US and helping Ukraine defend its interests.
As soon as the very foundation that Russia has relied on for years starts to crumble, fuel, the Kremlin suddenly slams on the brakes and halts gasoline exports. The system no longer believes it will survive. Logistics are stalling, the infrastructure is damaged, and a shortage is brewing inside the country, one that can no longer be hidden by pretty reports. Russia's energy sector is running in manual mode, which is starting to experience critical failures. One blow, and the entire structure starts to shake. Has the moment of reckoning finally arrived? We'll talk about this next. On the brink of collapse, Putin's Russia is getting closer and closer to a crisis. The Kremlin is officially imposing a complete ban on the export of automotive gasoline for all market participants. The restrictions will take effect from April 1st and will last for at least 4 months.
Life is getting cheaper, and it will be possible to create better conditions for economic development.
This decision was made after an emergency meeting of representatives of the oil industry where they officially confirmed a critical shortage of fuel within the country. The main goal of the restrictions was to protect domestic consumers and attempt to stop the rapid rise in prices at gas stations. In fact, the industry admitted that it is unable to provide for both at the same time. Thank you.
The management of international export contracts must be carefully balanced against the essential requirements of the domestic market, particularly when the industry is facing significant challenges brought about by severe production shortages. In such difficult economic conditions, it becomes necessary to evaluate how to fulfill existing global trade agreements while simultaneously ensuring that the local population's demand for goods and services is adequately met without causing further instability in the internal economy. There is currently both a significant physical shortage of the resource itself and the near total impossibility of fully exporting the goods, due to the extensive damage sustained by these specific Russian port logistics facilities. When it comes to shipping this fuel abroad,
the ban on gasoline exports followed a series of drone attacks on oil refineries, as a result of which at least 3 of them were shut down. Fuel production in particular, 2 incidents just in the past week, and many plants still cannot resume operations due to sanctions on Western equipment.
The amount of gasoline in Russia, let's put it this way, has been depleted, and the ability to export has been destroyed. But Russia, of course, won't admit that it can't export as much gasoline as before because Ukraine is striking. In Russia, they try not to acknowledge such things. That's why officially they say, we are imposing a ban on gasoline exports because it is justified. The gasoline shortage is indeed real. And so here you go, that's why there is less. Throughout 2025,
the defense forces of Ukraine carried out more than 140 attacks on oil refineries and oil depots in Russia. According to calculations by Reuters, last week about 40% of Russia's oil export capacity was halted, which became the most serious disruption in the supply of black gold in the modern history of Putin's,
this particular sovereign nation and the entire surrounding country territory. To put it in a completely different way so that the core concept becomes much clearer and easier for everyone to understand, we can look at the situation from an entirely new perspective.
Foreign currency revenues amounting to billions of dollars have come under threat, since gasoline exports were one of the key sources of budget income. At present, these strategic cash flows have been effectively cut off due to the imposed embargo.
Russia is earning less from the export of petroleum products, which previously, although not as much as resources, still brought in money. By resources, I mean oil and gas, but they also brought in money. So here too the losses will be obvious. $75 billion. This would have helped with the large-scale war. But during the war, Russia was selling somewhere between $47 to $49 to $50 billion a year. The Kremlin
is sacrificing the profits of oil giants to appease small businesses and the population, preventing a fuel crisis. Under martial law and attacks on
infrastructure, this can have a very negative effect when businesses simply start saying that they are shutting down, and this trend is also present in the Russian economy. And if businesses close, if fewer and fewer enterprises remain, the tax base shrinks, and this could be even worse for the budget. So here, this is called the multiplication of less than ideal scenarios, the multiplication of situations where you can't find a good answer and are constantly forced to choose between bad options.
A ban on gasoline exports was already introduced in Russia in August of last year, when Ukrainian drone attacks knocked out about 15% of refinery capacity, and it was lifted on January 31st. It is expected that if the situation with the restoration of oil refineries does not improve in the near future, the export ban may be extended beyond July 2026.
The economy cannot withstand this war, and Russia may increasingly lean toward the scenario of Germany in the First World War, when Berlin was not captured. There were no military actions on German territory, yet Germany capitulated because there was no way to ensure a normal economic life in the country. So Russia is very close to this stage. The second question is, when it reaches this crisis state, people are already saying that it will be a collapse.
With this, we put a period to our broadcast. We will continue right now to follow the most relevant events or to tell you about them first. Don't forget to subscribe. See you.